In this video, we are going to see how to design a miniature with information taken from pictures and reference sources. This video is intended for newcomers to the hobby, so I will take plenty of time to explain certain things. First, we are going to see what scale actually means, and then how to convert measurements we take from pictures into the dimensions we need to make the miniature. In a second stage, we will see how to convert these dimensions into miniatures, using prototypes to test all aspects of design and production. Lastly, we will explore different options to share your design, so that other people can use it too. What you see on this picture are an original Sherman tank and a decoy replica made at the same scale during World War II. This is the scale 1:1, meaning that the dimensions of the replica are identical to the dimensions of the original. Let us take a moment to notice that this replica has less details and features than the original. These replicas were detailed enough to fool the aerial photographic reconnaissance of the enemy. For the same reason, the eyes of the players can be fooled at the distances involved when playing a miniature battle. This is called the 3-foot rule. It means that from a distance of 3 feet, our eyes will not perceive very small features. This also means our eyes will not be able to spot small inaccuracies, which makes it easier for us to build our miniatures at this scale. This scale is 1:64, also called the 28mm scale. It means that the dimensions of the original have been divided by 64. These toy cars here are at this scale. This one is a replica of a Ford Mustang GT 2006, a car which according to Wikipedia has a length of 4.77 meters or 4,770 millimeters, which is the unit we are going to work with. Since we are going to use a spreadsheet program to convert measurements to scale, this is now a good moment to introduce it to you. You can find spreadsheet programs for free on the internet. In this cell here, named C3, I will write down the length of the original at the 1:1 scale in millimeters. Now I will ask this cell here, named D3, to take the value of the cell C3 and divide it by 64. The result is 74.53 millimeters. Since we are not going to be able to work beyond a precision of half a millimeter, I am going to round this result to the closest multiple of half a millimeter. Sometimes it makes more sense to round to the closest millimeter. This is why I don't ask the spreadsheet to make the calculation, but write it down myself. Here I have drawn the distance of 74.5 millimeters on a piece of paper. We can see that the scale of the toy is acceptable. At first my intention was to make miniatures of the Willys MB Jeep. Here is the picture I used as a reference. Notice that it was taken at a right angle, which allows me to make correct measurements. Just like I would do with a picture from a book, I take the measurements straight from my computer screen with a ruler. To have the most precise measurements, I click the zoom button until the Jeep appears as wide as my screen, then write down how many times I pressed that button. Here I zoomed in 4 times. I then use a ruler to measure segments from one reference point to the other in millimeters until I have measured the entire length of the vehicle. Once these measurements have been made, I write them down on the spreadsheet like this and add them to obtain the total length of the vehicle on the picture. Before we continue with this spreadsheet, I will have to explain what we're doing here from a mathematical point of view. Because the picture of the original vehicle is at an unknown scale, we have to find a way to figure out that scale so that we can use the measurements. The first segment we measured represents 34.35% of the total length on that picture. On the original vehicle, the length of the same segment would represent the same percentage of the total length. This gives us the following formula. Length of segment on picture divided by length of vehicle on picture is equal to 34.35%, which is also equal to length of segment on original vehicle divided by the length of the original vehicle. Reference sources like Wikipedia or specialized books can provide us with the length of the original vehicle. For the Willys MB, it is 3.35 meters or 3,350 millimeters. What we don't know yet is the length of the segment on the original vehicle. This is the unknown x for which we will now solve the equation. If we multiply both sides of the equation with the length of the original vehicle, we obtain x equals the length of the segment on the picture multiplied by the length of the original vehicle and divided by the length of the vehicle on the picture. On our spreadsheet, this is what the cell named C4 is instructed to calculate. This is the length of that segment in its original size. The cell D4 next to it divides it by 64 to give us the length of that segment on our miniature. These two cells can now be copied to the rest of their respective columns, and from then on, whenever you enter on the spreadsheet the measurements you made on the picture, the spreadsheet will convert them into the dimensions you need for your miniature. At this stage, we can start to collect the measurements we need and use the spreadsheet to convert them to the scale of our miniatures. In the next part, we will see how I use prototypes to refine the design and decide whether it made sense to continue with the project or not. Now that we have found a way to get the dimensions we need for our model, we can use them to build prototypes. Here you can see a simple template for the Jeep sides, which allowed me to make a very simple prototype that I used to check for the size of components. The second prototype was made to see if I could use a peripheral assembly method, which would have allowed me to have two heights for the car's bottom. This assembly method turned out to be too complex. At this stage I also realized the geometry of the Willys MB was too complicated for what I was looking for. After some research, I found that the Soviet Gaz-64 car was simpler to replicate into a miniature. I drew the third prototype on a piece of cardboard, cut it out and assembled it. There were only 2 points to improve upon: the rear panel asymmetric design, and more importantly the width of the rear fenders. At this stage the design of the car body was set, but the engineering effort was far from over. I made the template you are seeing here, which I used to make the body of 8 subsequent prototypes. It took me about 45 minutes to make the template, but from then on it would only take 6 minutes to draw a car body. Templates are time savers, and they also allow you to make parts without intellectual effort, which is important in engineering projects such as these. The fourth prototype was used for research on the front grille, the headlights, the windshield, the gearbox, and the steering wheel. Later, I would use it to design the round hood shape and to test the perfected rear fender covers. Although I knew from the start it would be too complicated, with this fifth prototype I tried to replicate the more complex shape of the Gaz-67 Jeep, just to see what it would look like. I later used this prototype for research on the rear fender covers. On the first weeks of the project I was fixated on using hover wheels, until I experimented with round wheels for the third prototype and found they were much easier to make than I expected. Later in the project I made a prototype with the hover technology to see what it would involve in terms of complexity and looks. Since I couldn't make a realistic front wheel, which is something that would also have taken too much time, I experimented with the idea of customizable front grills. This sixth prototype was also used to test the transparent windshield and to make the template for the trapezoidal base, something which would later be replaced with the more common rectangular base. Here I mass-produced wheel components and car bodies in order to be able to establish an average production time for each. These 4 prototypes would later be used to compare paint methods. Here is the production process for the miniature's base, starting with the template for the base cover, the cardboard elements of the base, the wire to make the base stick to magnets, the prismatic pillars and the jig to position them, and finally the decoration and paint faces. The smaller parts have to be researched as well. Here are seat prototypes, held in position by a magnet under the paper. It is quite fortunate that double wire clips happen to be of the exact width of a seat at this scale. It was difficult to figure out a way to attach the seat to the car's body, since neither metal nor plastic would stay in place permanently. In the end, the stems of Q-tips proved satisfactory. They were not really that noticeable and could be glued reliably. This is the display I intend to use on the printable guide, so that the reader can see exactly how to make these parts and assemble them. This is the production process for the back seat. The materials used are a train ticket and the wire from a double wire clip. The design philosophy behind these miniatures is to use materials that are commonly found and cost absolutely nothing. If we have to choose, it is more important to have a simple production method than a realistic model. It must be possible for a 10-year-old child to make the miniature by himself. To make these windshields, I used a somewhat thick plastic cover taken from cheese packaging. Plastic is difficult to work with. This is why I use Scotch tape for the markings and toothpicks to glue it to the miniature. The 6th prototype was used to test masking the windshield with Scotch tape and also to test a spray paint with a powdery effect. Early prototypes are ideal to accumulate several experiments on them, since they are not intended to be used in a game. I also used it to test transfer letters, which I discovered to be dry transfer letters that are difficult to use, and not the wet transfer decals I wanted. Here is prototype 7A, followed by prototype number 8 with integral bumpers. Its subassemblies have been glued and painted. Next is prototype 7D, which has been painted without base coating. It shows you clearly why base coating is necessary with these miniatures. While this might seem like a waste of a good miniature, we have to keep in mind that toothpick miniatures cost practically nothing, and are therefore ideal for such experiments. Next are prototypes 7C with only one layer of base coating, and 7B almost complete with base coating and a layer of paint. We can see here the jig I made for painting the wheel axle sub-assemblies, and some of those in different stages of painting. Finally, these are the sub-assemblies in the way they should be painted separately before assembly. In this part we will see the completed prototypes. The unfinished prototype number 7D has been gifted to a fellow hobbyist along with the first templates, so he can make this model on his own and provide me with feedback. Prototype number 6 was used to test the visual impact of using slightly different nuances of the same color. There were no experimentations with prototype 7A, which is supposed to be a demonstration model of how the design is supposed to look like, apart from the missing front bumpers. Working on several models helps identifying the more delicate parts of the design. In this design, the windshield is difficult to get right, as we can see on prototype 7B. This was the opportunity to test the option with a deployed canvas top to see if it corrects the windshield's angle. Prototype 7C was used to see how to use color from a spray can with a brush to make small corrections. This is the teal color from Rust Oleum, which I really like and try to preserve a bit. This is why I attempted to use another color from Rust-Oleum called Antique Pink as a base color on prototype number 8. Prototype number 8 is the first with an integral bumper. This base color didn't work at all, even after several layers of green paint. The pink color is very visible in the windshield area. A new body template was made following the instructions of the booklet I am writing along with the project. I tested it on this production model, which I wanted to be the final model for this video. It didn't work out well. Among other things, the windshield became unexpectedly unglued on one side, causing the paint to crack. Nevertheless, at that stage the design is satisfactory, and if you went this far with your project, you might want to share not only the end result, but the dimensions and production aspects as well. There are different ways to share your design. The more work you put into it, the easier you will make it for others to replicate what you have made. Basically, it comes down to communicate two things: the dimensions of the parts and how the parts have to be assembled. The least you can do would be to take a picture of all the parts, like I did here with this display, another picture with the dimensions of the more challenging parts, and finally a picture of the end result. This should take you a couple of hours to do. For those who would like to replicate your design, there would still be a lot of guesswork, but at least it would spare them the more challenging stages. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you could make a complete set of instructions, with a precise description and dimensions of every part, and a streamlined assembly method. As an example, here's the booklet I made for the Trooper miniatures design. It is quite comprehensive, but it took me 2 months to make. A good compromise can be found in diagrams. For the end user, they are easier to use than photographs, and for you, they will take about a day to make. We can see here a series of diagrams that helps the reader to build the template for the car body. These starter kits are another way to bypass the complexity of a design. When you use a template, it only takes you a couple of minutes to transfer the markings to a piece of cardboard. So why not make more than you need and hand them out around you? The windshields here follow the same logic. If someone doesn't have a small drill, or has trouble sourcing the right kind of plastic, why not make a few more of these? A final but important note is that it should be free. The whole point of these miniatures is that they cost practically nothing to make, so asking for money would simply defeat the purpose. If there was any vehicle you always wanted to have as a miniature, now you know how to make it. You can also go a bit further and experiment with vehicles or concepts that could have been, such as this one here. Thank you for watching and have fun!